When it comes down to finding if you're getting the most out of keto, you have to look at the data. Okay, everything on this channel is about looking at science and looking at data, whether it's peer-reviewed science or science of yourself and understanding the data of yourself so that you can make the best decisions. So I want to give you the tools to truly know what the best ketone range that you should be in is, but also how you should go about testing. So we're going to break down the different kinds of ketones and how you test them, but we're also going to break down what the optimal ketone range is depending on who you are and what kind of activity you're doing. So let's go ahead and get down to the science. Hey, if you didn't know already, you are watching the internet's leading performance, nutrition, and fat loss channel. So we've got keto content, fasting content, and a bunch of other content in between, and new videos every single Tuesday, Friday, and Sunday at 7 a.m. Pacific time. Okay, so first off, we have to take a look at the 3 different ketone bodies and give a quick overview of how they're measured, because this is very, very, very important if you want to have success and you want to lose fat or just feel good on the keto diet. I mean, very important. We have acetoacetate, we have acetone, and we have beta-hydroxybutyrate. Now, all 3 of these ketones are created in the liver from fatty acids. So fat gets mobilized, it goes to the liver, and it goes through ketogenesis and creates ketone bodies. Okay? Same process pretty much for all 3 of them. But once they leave the liver, they have very different roles within the body. Okay? Acetoacetate is really one of the first ketones that's produced. Unfortunately, it doesn't do a whole lot within the body. You see, it has a very low molecular weight, so its density, its ability to actually do things within the cells isn't all that much. So that's not one that we really want to pay too much attention to. It's just not that important. At least right now, the research isn't showing that it's that important. Okay, then we have acetone. Acetone is almost a byproduct ketone. Okay, it's a ketone that we measure with our breath. Maybe you've seen those breath meters like Ketonics and stuff like that. The problem is the acetone doesn't really do anything in our body. You see, acetoacetate at some point, which is the first ketone I mentioned, sort of self-destructs. It's kind of fragile, and it has to do, again, with its low molecular mass. So it ends up being fragile and it breaks down. That breakdown actually can create acetone, an additional ketone body, which we just expel. So that acetone isn't showing to do a whole lot. Now, then we have beta-hydroxybutyrate. Okay, beta-hydroxybutyrate is the primary ketone body. It has a large molecular mass. Okay, we're looking about 10.4 grams per deciliter. Okay, so it's a pretty big molecule overall, meaning that's the one that's going to give us the energy. That's what we want to pay attention to. Here's the big problem. Most people measure with a urine strip. Why? Because they're cheap, and you can go to CVS and you can get a simple urine strip. Urine strips measure acetoacetate. Okay, so that acetoacetate isn't that important, but the other thing that the urine strips measure is they measure excess acetoacetate because it's already leaving through the urine. So what ends up happening is we create these ketones, and then whatever we don't use goes into the urine and is passed through. And sometimes they're reabsorbed, but acetoacetate pretty much just goes on out through the urine. So whenever you're using those urine test strips, it's a pretty clear indicator that we're just wasting ketones if it's registering ketones on it. So not the best, most accurate way to measure. Then, of course, when it comes down to the actual acetone breath testers, those are widely inaccurate unless you're spending like $700 or $800 on a super high grade one. But even then, you're not getting the true accuracy that you need. But by and large, the acetone is just not an important thing to measure. It's sort of a byproduct. You want to be measuring the beta-hydroxybutyrate. So when you're looking at millimoles per liter, like you see these numbers thrown out there, like where should I be at 1 millimole per liter, at 1.5 millimole per liter? What they're looking at is the millimoles of the total amount of beta-hydroxybutyrate that's in the blood. Now there's a conversion value if you wanted to take a look at grams per deciliter or milligrams per deciliter, but the fact is looking at it millimoles per liter is just the simple way to do it. Now, what we want to do is we want to determine what the best ketone range is for your given goal. Now, I will say first and foremost, before I go on in this video, that when it comes down to measuring your ketone levels, make sure you're using the Keto Mojo meter. Okay, these guys are awesome. You've probably seen me all over their page before because I do a lot of content for them. But if you're going to measure your ketones, don't be measuring it with a urine strip. Don't be measuring it with a breath meter. Literally go straight to the source and use a blood meter, because if you're serious about trying to determine where you are at from a ketone standpoint, you want to be using a meter that's actually truly approved and used not just by the keto community, but by the medical community as well. Because honestly, you have to be your own science experiment in some ways, and you have to be your own advocate. But the nice thing about Keto Mojo is they've also got ketone strips that are literally only $1 a piece. So they're the least expensive ketone strips that are on the market. Normally, that's the main reason people don't want to test their blood, is because it gets expensive. But if you start doing some research on yourself and you have strips that are affordable, you can get lots of different data points. And that's what I'm going to get to in just a second, where you can test at different times of the day to determine where you are with different instances, like when you exercise, et cetera, et cetera. So the cool thing is, since I know these guys so well, they've been to my office, they're good friends of mine. In fact, Dorian, who's actually the owner of Keto Mojo, literally is in the same town that I grew up in. So because they're good friends of mine, they've given all my fans a discount down in the description, so make sure you check them out. Also, huge thank you to Keto Mojo for helping me keep this content free by sponsoring this video. All right, so now let's talk about where you need to land in terms of your ketone range. So first and foremost, generally speaking, 0 to 0.5 millimoles per liter on a Mojo meter or a blood meter in general is going to mean that you're not really in ketosis. You see, what happens is we actually create ketone bodies in between our meals too. Like whenever we go a period of time without eating, we have a certain degree of ketogenesis that is occurring. Ketogenesis, which is the creation of ketones, doesn't only happen when you're in a nutritional state of ketosis. It does happen to a small degree at other times too. So you might find that you're not even in keto, but you measure your ketone levels and they end up still showing like 0.1, 0.2. Well, that's because you still create some ketones and doesn't necessarily mean you're in nutritional ketosis. So by and large, 0.5 and less, just kind of disregard. 0.5 to 1.5 millimoles per liter is considered light nutritional ketosis. Now, full disclaimer, these numbers are based upon just general homeostasis and just going through the day, okay? They're not taking into account any extreme situations like exercise. I'll touch on that in a minute. So when you're just chilling, going through the day, this is where you want to land. 0.5 to 1.5 is light nutritional ketosis, which means you are technically in ketosis, but you're not creating a lot of ketones. Okay, so what it usually means is that in this case, you might have a tad too much protein and not enough fat going in. Okay, I will say this and be fully transparent. Protein will not completely kick you out of keto unless you went completely overboard. But too much protein can bring your ketone levels down, simply because it does go through gluconeogenesis. So if your goal is to get the highest amount of ketones possible, then you may want to be a little bit concerned with your protein intake. But if you're just looking at it from overall just good health, I wouldn't be too concerned about it. But again, that's where using a meter like the Keto Mojo meter comes in handy, because you can see where you land at different times of the day and see who you are as an individual with your ketone levels. Okay, so then let's talk real quick about what the optimal range is by and large. 1.5 millimoles per liter to 3 millimoles per liter is considered the optimal range for just hanging out, okay? So if you're just going through the day, sitting at your desk, walking around, this is where you want to land. This means that you're creating enough ketones to be in a good spot, you're burning good fat, your brain has good energy, your cells have just enough ketones, things are rocking and rolling, and this is where you should be for the most comfort. Now, I will say some things change, and I'll talk about that in a second, like if you've been fat adapted for a while, et cetera, et cetera. Let's quickly talk about if you're 3 millimoles and up though. If you're showing 3 millimoles per liter and up, it's not a bad thing, okay? But what it generally does mean for most people, and again, I say that with a grain of salt, most people, it means that you're not eating enough food. Okay, it means that you're going into kind of a starvation mode a little bit, so your body's ramping up the ketone production. There's no need to get super high with your ketone levels. Like, you don't need to get them up that high. And honestly, if you just keep it at 3 or less, you're in good shape. Now, if you are a type 1 diabetic, if you're over 3 millimoles, you just want to be a little bit careful. You want to make sure you're still taking your insulin, talking to your doctor. Ketoacidosis does not occur until we're talking like 10, 12, honestly much higher than that in terms of millimoles per liter. So you're not going into ketoacidosis if you're at 3 to 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, don't even worry about it. That just means that you might be a little bit too hungry. You might need to increase your calories, increase your protein intake a little bit, especially if you're working out a lot. All right, let's talk real quick about fat adaptation for a second. Recent studies are showing now that the body has the ability to actually use plain fats, free fatty acids, not ketones, free fatty acids, as a direct fuel source for skeletal muscle in some situations. So what that means is, as the body becomes fat adapted, the body has the ability to take fat and not necessarily convert it into ketones. It goes through another metabolic process in the liver that, quite frankly, is even more metabolically expensive, but that doesn't really matter. What I'm meaning is that those fats can fuel muscle fiber, muscle tissue, which means that the body may not have to produce as much ketone during that time. So what does that mean to you? It means that when you're exercising and you're fat adapted, you've been doing keto for a while, do not be alarmed if your ketone levels go down. One of my favorite things to do is to measure my ketones in the middle of a workout or in the middle of a long run. Like, I'll stop and I'll keep it with me in my little belt or whatever. Okay, that's perfect because it tells me how fat adapted I am. I really get a good reading there. If my ketone levels are dropping, when I'm doing a higher intensity activity, it usually makes sense. It usually means that my body is starting to go through a little bit more of that Cori cycle or that lactate cycle where it's actually creating more energy that way. The point in me telling you this is I have a lot of people hitting my contact us form. I have a lot of people hitting my email asking me about this, saying my ketone levels are getting lower and I'm eating more fat. What's happening? You're getting fat adapted and your body is becoming more efficient. Okay, it doesn't have to produce as many ketones to actually have the same effect. So at that point in time, your ketone levels are less important. They don't have to be as high. You just want to make sure that you're above that 0.5 mark. So if you're coming down to like 0.7, 0.8, I think that's perfectly fine if you've been exercising and there's a reason for it. But then again, that's why you want to measure. You want to get multiple data points, and then you can test it out with different kinds of food. Now, the other thing that I want you to do is I want you to try testing your blood ketone levels right after a meal and see what happens. Usually, if there's protein in the meal, you're going to see your ketone levels drop. One thing to make very, very, very clear is that your blood sugar levels, your blood glucose levels never go down to zero. We still want blood sugar, guys. It's a common misconception, and I've done videos on it. Glucose in your blood, ketones in your blood, they're going to happen simultaneously. It's not one or the other, okay? But the cells will preferentially use ketones if they're available. So they're still both in the system. So what we want to make sure of is we don't want our blood glucose to go super, super low. We want it to stay nice and even. So what you're going to find is when you are eating, you still have a little bit of a rise in blood sugar. So don't be alarmed if your blood sugar goes up and your ketone levels drop. And again, it's really important for me to mention that the Keto Mojo meter also allows you to test your glucose readings. So if you wanted to, you could test your ketones and then see where your glucose levels are at. And you can start getting really advanced and start looking at sort of the crossover and where those need to be. I'll do another video on that because it's a very complex topic, looking at where your glucose needs to be in relation to your ketones. But by and large, this is the gist of it. Try to find yourself in that 0.8 category to 3 if you're really doing keto for a long period of time, with 1.5 to 3 being the optimal range altogether. Now, when you're doing longer distance runs, let me tell you this, is that you're gonna find in the beginning, your ketone levels go up, but towards the end of the run, your ketone levels will go down. More on this later when I do an endurance video. As always, make sure you keep it locked in here on my channel, and a huge, huge thank you to Keto Mojo for helping make this channel possible and for giving everyone a great deal. I'll see you guys in the next video.